All right, so are you ready for this? You guys have sent us on this awesome quest to figure out if just listening to podcasts can really unlock fluency in a new language.
Interesting.
Yeah, it does sound kind of too good to be true, right? Like a magic shortcut or something.
Right.
So, we're going to dive deep today into this podcast episode called Get This. I spent 30 days listening to English podcasts, and my skills improved dramatically.
Wow.
And we're going to see if there's any real science behind this or if it's just, hype.
Ooh, I love this. It's like a podcast about podcasts.
Right. So, meta.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's break it down.
Let's do it. So, the podcast hosts, they start their journey and they're like, ugh, I'm so over traditional language learning. Textbooks, flashcards, all that jazz.
Been there.
Right. And they're really intimidated by speaking, which I think a lot of us can relate to.
Absolutely. That fear of making mistakes.
Totally.
Yeah.
And they're looking for a more natural way to learn.
Yeah, I get that.
And then they stumble upon this theory, just listening to a language can be the key to fluency.
Intriguing.
Right. Like how babies learn their native language. They're just immersed in it.
As someone who's always struggled with verb conjugations and grammar rules, this idea is super appealing to me.
Oh, tell me about it. It sounds way more fun than memorizing vocabulary lists.
Okay, but is there any actual science to back this up?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Well, luckily, we've got you here, the expert.
Well, let's just say the host's experience isn't just some random anecdote.
Oh, good.
There's actually neuroscience behind this whole listening to learn thing.
Okay, lay it on us.
So think about those tiny humans, babies. They're constantly surrounded by this symphony of sounds.
Right, like a never-ending language stream.
Exactly. And their brains, those little sponges, are working overtime to make sense of it all.
Wow, and specific parts of their brain are involved in this, right?
You bet. Areas like Broca's area and Wernicke's area, they're like the language processing hubs of the brain. They're busy decoding patterns, figuring out grammar, all intuitively.
I'm trying to picture this, like these little brains just soaking it all up.
That's exactly what's happening. And that's why this consistent exposure to spoken language, even without cracking open a textbook, can create this awesome foundation for fluency.
So it's like their brains are these amazing pattern recognition machines just picking up on the nuances of language without even realizing it.
Nailed it. Now, the podcast host, they took this idea to the extreme.
How so?
They decided to go all in 30 days of pure podcast listening.
Yeah.
No textbooks, no flashcards, just immersing themselves in the flow of English.
Wow, that's dedication. But I can only imagine the challenges they must have faced.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The host describes that first week as a total whirlwind of confusion.
Like information overload.
Totally. The speed was crazy fast.
Yeah.
Accents were throwing them off, and there were moments where they just wanted to give up.
Oh, I bet. That feeling of, will I ever understand this?
Right. It's that classic language learner struggle. But here's the key. They didn't let those early hurdles derail them.
Persistence is key, huh?
You got it. They tweaked the podcast speed, used transcripts to help with comprehension, and most importantly, they just kept listening.
So even though they were feeling lost at times, their brain was actually working behind the scenes, making those connections.
Precisely. That's the beauty of neuroplasticity. Our brains are constantly rewiring themselves based on our experiences.
So by challenging their brain with all these new sounds and patterns, the host was essentially like paving the way for fluency.
Exactly. And you know what's really cool? By week 2, something amazing happens. Things start clicking.
Like a light bulb moment.
Yeah. They begin understanding full sentences without having to translate in their head. Their pronunciation starts to improve, and get this, they even begin to think in English.
Whoa, that's a game changer.
It's like a sign that the language is becoming more than just an external system they're trying to decode.
It's becoming a part of them.
Exactly. It's integrated into their thoughts.
The host even shares this vivid memory in the podcast. They're walking through a park and they have this spontaneous thought, this tree looks amazing. And it's in English, not their native language.
I love that example. It's like a perfect illustration of how powerful deep immersion can be.
It's like the language becomes less about rules and more about a natural way of expressing yourself.
Totally. Okay, so we've seen how awesome consistent listening can be, but how do we go from understanding to actually speaking the language?
Right, because that's the ultimate goal, right? To be able to communicate.
Exactly. Well, that's where week 3 of the host's experiment gets super interesting.
What happens? They finally start speaking.
They do. And it's all about taking that passive knowledge and turning it into active skill.
So how do they do that?
They start explaining the content of the podcast they've been listening to out loud, even if it's just to themselves.
Like practicing what they've learned.
Exactly. They're turning their brain into this language lab, experimenting with the sounds and structures they've absorbed.
That's brilliant. But I imagine that takes a lot of courage, especially in the beginning.
Oh, absolutely. The host admits to feeling self-conscious at first.
Oh, I bet. It's like that fear of sounding silly.
Right. But they embrace this idea of progress over perfection. They realize that making mistakes is a vital part of learning.
So instead of being afraid to sound awkward, they just kept speaking, allowing themselves to, stumble and learn from those stumbles.
Exactly. That mindset shift is so important for any kind of learning, not just languages.
So true. It's so easy to get caught up in trying to be perfect, but when we focus on progress, on just showing up and doing the work, even if it's messy, that's when the real learning happens.
Couldn't agree more. And that's exactly what leads the podcast host to this remarkable transformation by week 4.
Wait, so after just a month of listening to podcasts, they're fluent?
Well, not magically fluent, but they've made this unbelievable progress.
Like what kind of progress are we talking about?
They're watching movies without subtitles, understanding conversations effortlessly, and even having back-and-forth dialogue with native speakers.
No way, stuff they never thought possible just a month earlier.
Exactly. It's honestly inspiring to witness that kind of transformation.
It's like proof that this whole listening approach can actually work.
Right. And what's even more encouraging is that it wasn't about some secret formula or magic trick.
It was about putting in the effort, being consistent, and using those smart learning techniques we've been talking about.
Exactly. And that's why this deep dive is so valuable for our listeners. It's not just about being impressed by someone else's success.
It's about figuring out how we can use these techniques to achieve our own language goals.
Exactly. So let's get into the specifics. What were those actionable strategies the host used that we can all learn from?
All right, let's break it down. First up, something super simple but powerful. Listening every day, even if it's just for 15 minutes.
It might seem obvious.
Yeah, but does it actually make that big of a difference?
Oh, it totally does. It all comes down to habit formation.
Okay, so like making language learning a part of our daily routine.
Exactly. Think about it. You don't debate with yourself about whether you're going to brush your teeth every day, right?
Right, it's just automatic.
The host suggests we approach language learning with that same consistency.
Okay, so it's about shifting our mindset from I should to I do.
Making it a non-negotiable part of your day.
I like that. But even 15 minutes of listening to a foreign language can feel overwhelming at first.
Oh, absolutely, especially if you're a beginner.
So what's the trick to not getting totally overwhelmed?
The host's next tip is all about easing that cognitive overload. Focus on grasping the main idea, not getting hung up on every single word.
That makes sense. So it's like, don't sweat the small stuff.
Exactly. It's
Yep.
about understanding the gist of what's being said, the overall message, the emotional tone, the context.
So it's more about getting the big picture rather than getting bogged down in the details.
You got it. Is how we naturally listen in our native language.
Right. We don't consciously analyze every single word when someone's talking to us.
We focus on the meaning.
And that makes the whole process feel less intimidating, right?
Way less. Like a conversation, not a test.
Okay, that's a huge relief. But how do we move from understanding to actually speaking with confidence? Beyond just listening.
Ah, that's where the host's next technique comes in. Shadowing.
Shadowing, what's that?
It involves mimicking native speakers to fine-tune your pronunciation.
So like copying how they sound.
Exactly. It might feel a bit silly at first, but it taps into this amazing system in our brains called the mirror neuron system.
Ooh, that sounds fancy. What does it do?
It basically allows us to learn through imitation by observing and then copying actions and sounds.
So it's like how babies learn to make facial expressions.
Yes, they watch us and then try to do the same thing.
Wow, so by shadowing native speakers, we're essentially training our brains and our vocal cords to mirror the rhythms and intonation of the language.
Exactly. It's like creating this neural shortcut to fluency by tapping into our brain's natural ability to learn through imitation.
Okay, that makes so much sense. But I imagine it can be tempting to just stick with one podcast you really love, right?
Oh yeah, I totally get that. It's like finding a favorite song and playing it on repeat.
But is that the best strategy for language learning?
Well, the host actually advises against it.
Really? Why is that?
Because just like our bodies need a variety of nutrients to thrive, our brains need a diverse range of language input to become truly fluent.
Makes sense. So we shouldn't just stick to one genre of podcasts.
Exactly. You want to branch out and listen to different things like news podcasts, storytelling podcasts, conversational podcasts. The more variety, the better.
So it's about exposing ourselves to different accents, vocabulary, and styles of speaking.
You got it. It's like creating this rich tapestry of language in your brain.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. It's all about stepping outside our comfort zone and embracing the full spectrum of the language we're learning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's one more piece of the puzzle that's absolutely essential.
Oh, and what's that?
It's the one thing that brings all these techniques together. Speak.
Wait, so we can't just rely on listening alone?
Listening is the foundation,
Mm-hmm.
but speaking is where we take that passive knowledge and turn it into an active skill.
So it's like the difference between knowing something and actually being able to do it.
Exactly. It's like learning to play a musical instrument. You can study music theory and listen to countless performances.
But until you actually pick up the instrument and start playing, you're not really mastering the skill.
Perfect analogy. It's about taking ownership of the language, making it your own, and expressing yourself authentically, even if it's a bit messy at first.
So we've got to get out there and use what we've learned.
Yes. Even if it's just talking to yourself, practicing out loud, putting those new words and phrases into action.
It's all about putting ourselves out there and making those mistakes. Right.
That's where the real growth happens.
This has been incredibly insightful. I'm sure our listeners are buzzing with ideas.
I bet. It's been an amazing deep dive into the world of language learning through podcasts.
And it's not just about achieving fluency, it's about expanding our horizons and embracing the joy of learning.
Exactly. It's about connecting with other cultures and opening ourselves up to new experiences.
And who knows, maybe it'll even inspire someone to pick up a new language.
I hope so. Because the journey to fluency in any area of life is filled with so many rewards.
Absolutely. And remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Be patient with yourself, enjoy the process, and celebrate all those little victories along the way.
Well said. On that note, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be back soon with even more insights and inspiration from this fascinating podcast.
Stay tuned.
All right, so we're back and ready to delve even deeper into this idea of unlocking fluency through podcasts.
You know, what's really striking me is how this concept goes beyond just languages.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, think about it. How often do we truly listen with the intention to understand, rather than just waiting for our turn to speak?
That's a good point. It's like we're often so focused on what we're going to say next that we don't really absorb what the other person is saying.
Exactly. And cultivating that active listening skill, the kind that requires us to put aside our own biases and truly engage with what the other person is sharing.
It can make a huge difference in our relationships, our work, even our own self-awareness.
You got it. It's about being present in the conversation, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally.
It's like we're constantly bombarded with information these days, but how much of it are we actually taking in and processing?
That's the key question. Maybe this whole exploration of language learning can be a reminder for all of us to be more mindful, more present in how we listen.
Not just to podcasts, but to the world around us.
Exactly. To really tune in and pay attention to the people and experiences around us.
Because when we truly listen, we open ourselves up to new perspectives, new ideas, and deeper connections.
Beautifully said. And perhaps by listening more deeply, with open hearts and open minds, we can start to bridge those divides that separate us.
And create a more understanding and compassionate world.
I love that. Now that's a goal worth striving for.
So on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this incredible deep dive.
I agree. It's been a fascinating journey exploring the world of language learning through podcasts.
And maybe even discovering some new insights about ourselves along the way.
Exactly. It's been a reminder that learning isn't just about acquiring knowledge or skills. It's about growth, connection, and expanding our horizons.
Beautifully said. And remember, the journey to fluency in any area of life is a marathon, not a sprint.
Be patient with yourself, enjoy the process, and celebrate all those small victories along the way.
And don't forget to keep listening. Until next time, happy learning. They're watching movies without subtitles.
Wow, no way.
Understanding conversations like it's no big deal.
That's incredible.
And even, get this, chatting back and forth with native speakers.
All after just a month.
Yep, a month earlier, they never thought they could do any of that stuff.
It really is remarkable how much progress they made in such a short time.
It is. And what I think is so cool is that It wasn't because of some secret hack or, a magic pill.
Right. It was about putting in the work
Exactly. Consistent effort, smart learning techniques.
and a willingness to kind of embrace the whole messy process of learning a language.
Because it's not always going to be pretty, right?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
But that's what makes this deep dive so awesome for our listeners.
You just give them hope.
Exactly. It's not just about, being wowed by someone else's achievement.
It's about taking away those actionable insights.
That we can all apply to our own language journeys.
Exactly. So let's break down some of those techniques, starting with something so simple but so powerful, listening every single day.
Even if it's just for a few minutes.
It's like 15 minutes. Is that enough?
Totally. Even 15 minutes can make a huge difference.
Because
it taps into the power of habit formation.
Okay, so we're talking about making language learning part of our routine.
Like brushing your teeth.
Something you do automatically.
Exactly. No matter what.
That makes sense. But I gotta be honest, even 15 minutes of listening to another language can feel intimidating.
Especially at first.
Right. So the host's next tip is all about making it less overwhelming.
And more manageable.
What is it?
Focus on getting the main idea.
Don't get hung up on every single word.
You got it. Because let's be real, that's how we listen in our native language.
We don't analyze every little thing.
We get the gist.
Oh, we understand the context.
Exactly. And applying that same principle to language learning can make it feel way less stressful.
More like a conversation, less like a test.
Exactly. You want to enjoy the process.
Okay, so we're listening every day. We're not stressing about every single word. But how do we actually start speaking with confidence?
Oh, that's where shadowing comes in.
Shadowing. Okay, you're going to have to explain this one.
So basically, you mimic native speakers.
Like, I copy how they sound.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It might feel a little weird at first, but it really helps you fine-tune your pronunciation.
Interesting.
And it all has to do with our brains and this thing called the mirror neuron system.
Ooh, fancy.
It's this awesome system that allows us to learn by imitation.
So, like how babies learn to make faces by copying us.
Yes. It's amazing.
So by shadowing native speakers, we're training our brains and our vocal cords to sound more like them.
Exactly. We're tapping into our brain's natural ability to learn through imitation.
Okay, I'm starting to get it, but I know I'd be tempted to just stick to one podcast I really like.
Oh, I totally get that.
Like finding that perfect playlist.
But the host actually recommends against that.
Really?
Think of it like a balanced diet.
Okay.
You need a variety of nutrients to stay healthy, right?
Thanks.
Well, your brain needs a variety of language input to become fluent.
So we got to branch out, listen to different genres.
Use storytelling, conversations. The more diverse, the better.
It's about expanding our horizons and creating this like rich tapestry of language in our minds.
You said it. So we're listening every day. We're not getting hung up on every little detail. We're shadowing native speakers, and we're diversifying our podcast choices.
Okay, what else? What's the secret sauce that brings it all together?
It's simple, but powerful. Speak.
Wait, so we can't just passively listen our way to fluency?
Listening lays the groundwork, but speaking is where we really solidify our skills.
So it's like knowing the rules of the game versus actually getting out there and playing.
Exactly. You can study music theory and listen to all the Mozart you want, but you won't really master the piano until you start playing it yourself.
I love that analogy.
So even if it's just talking to yourself, practice speaking out loud, use those new words and phrases.
It's all about putting ourselves out there.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's where the real learning happens.
I'm feeling inspired. What about you?
Totally. This deep dive has been so insightful.
And it's not just about achieving fluency. It's about embracing the joy of lifelong learning.
It's about connecting with different cultures, opening our minds to new ideas, and expanding our horizons.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe this will inspire someone to finally take the plunge and start learning that language they've always dreamed of.
I hope so. It's never too late to start.
And remember, it's a journey, not a race.
Be kind to yourself, enjoy the process,
And celebrate all those little wins along the way.
because every step forward is a victory.
You know, as we're talking about this, it makes me think about how this idea of unlocking fluency through listening, it's not just about languages, is it?
That's so true. It really applies to how we learn and understand everything in life, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, think about it. How often do we actually really listen to someone with the goal of understanding them, not just waiting for our turn to talk?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We think we're listening, but we're really just like rehearsing our response in our heads.
Guilty as charged. But if we can actually develop that, that active listening skill, where we put our own biases aside and really try to get where the other person is coming from. It could change everything, right? Our relationships, the way we work, even just how well we know ourselves.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the most important skills we can learn in life.
And it's so hard, especially these days when we're just bombarded with information from all sides.
It's true. There's just so much noise.
Yeah. And maybe this deep dive into language learning, it can be a good reminder for all of us to be more aware, to be more present when we're listening,
Yeah, to slow down and really pay attention,
not just to podcasts,
but to everything around us.
to the people we care about, to the experiences we're having, to the world.
Because when we truly listen,
We open ourselves up to so much more.
right, new perspectives, new ideas, deeper connections.
That's beautiful. So, with that in mind, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
It has been a fascinating one.
It really has. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the world of language learning through podcasts with us, and maybe even learned a little something about yourself along the way.
And remember, whether you're learning a new language or tackling any other challenge in life, it's a journey, not a race. So be patient with yourself, savor the process, and celebrate those small wins along the way.
Beautifully said. And until next time, keep those ears open, keep those minds curious, and happy learning.